You
I'm
know what?
really
I was
sorry about that, guys, because
so
we actually have been working really hard to make sure that this doesn't happen. And this morning we recorded a like almost a 2 hour test session, and it was completely fine. And
Isn't
now
that
it's not
crazy?
working. So,
Yeah.
well, anyway, why don't we just jump into our topic today?
Thank you so much for bearing with us. Yeah, we recorded a 90-minute test, and of course, we're always testing. But honestly, my mom said something last week to me that because we had a lot of start and stops last week, and
Hmm.
because of our first episode didn't, we were trying to figure out if it was a bandwidth thing. We changed some stuff around, and still, my mom said, if your message is good and you're doing things, especially for God and for the right reasons, like Satan has a hold over technology, and don't discount some tech demon. She didn't say tech demons, but that's what she meant. And sometimes, yeah, you just for us in the field, and Rudy and I both work with a lot of technology. Yeah, sometimes you can't explain these sorts of things;
Hmm.
they just happen. It's also because you're drinking a Protestant beer. That's what it is.
God is not pleased. He's
No,
not
he's not.
pleased. He wanted me to drink a Trappist ale.
Let that be a lesson to you. So there is a lot of good news happening across the country, wouldn't we say? And I think a lot of it has to do with the reopening. Um, People are getting squirrely and cagey. I'm getting really squirrely and cagey. Um, it has affected me. Oh, thanks for the. Looks like my volume is low a little bit. So I'll change it and talk about it at the same time. It is. It's a difficult time. But what's nice is what we're seeing is that a lot of places are reopening. Right. Georgia apparently wants to reopen early. Colorado, my home state, wants to open up on the. Texas, of course, wants to open. California is still slated for what is it, Rudy? It's the 15th, right?
Yeah, May 15th.
Yeah,
Hmm.
May 15th. So, just a lot of stuff that's positive, but also it's frustrating because we're going to be slower to start than I think a lot of our counterparts. And
Hmm.
what this also means is this is yet another week. So this is something Rudy pointed out to me. I think because Ashley saw this, right? But in terms of our religious life, our dispensation. So the church again did have a fixed limit on paper on when dispensations were supposed to end. Now, don't freak out when I tell you this, by the way, but they were slated for April 19th,
That
and
was the original document that
that was
was
the original
released
document.
by Archbishop Gomez.
Yeah.
And yesterday we were a little worried about it because obviously, there's nothing really we can do, but um, we were worried about it, and we did a digging to see if we could find any updates to this dispensation, and there isn't. So maybe it's coming in the next couple of days or something. But
As far
um,
as now, I'm not a canon lawyer and I'm not a priest or anything like that, but it seems like to me with these extraordinary circumstances that chances are your dispensation, just by the nature of the scenario, have been extended rather than because you still don't have access to the sacraments or the mass or anything as laity.
mhm.
So it wouldn't stand a reason to put that against your soul if there's literally just not the means. Um, this is just like scenarios where you can't go to mass or you don't have the obligation, or there hasn't been like a priest in the region for forever, right? And it's like, well, how do I meet my Sunday obligation? It's like these are extraordinary circumstances, and God still exists outside the sacraments. His mercy and his compassion and what he binds and looses upon the church is greater than the tenets that we as humans hold on to, which is
Mhm.
important. Um, but man, wouldn't you wish, like, one thing that we've been talking about, and kind of the crux of this episode is we've been trying to figure out, because it's difficult, and I think it'd be very silly to pretend it's not difficult, to really talk about what obedience means to us at this time and what the limits, maybe is the incorrect terminology, but what the limits of that obedience is and what we can do as Catholics to really spearhead this. And also maybe some of our obligations that we have to the church as the church has to us, would you say?
Yeah, this
Well, you
came
know,
about a couple days ago. I had a really interesting conversation with a good friend of mine, and we were just discussing obedience as a whole. We were discussing things like the SSPX and that sort of thing, and without getting into it, without getting too into detail, I guess I'm more sympathetic towards the SSPX than most people, and so we were talking about obedience and how that act of consecrating bishops was disobedient, and started getting into the weeds of canon law. And the crux of our conversation was really like, how much are we bound to obedience, to obey things like, let's say, for example, in however long it is. What is it? Today's the 21st, 22nd or something. So
23rd.
we still have quite a bit of time left to get to May 15th. And we don't even know, for example, if for certain that the churches are going to be open. And I happen to think that like keeping the churches closed is a disservice to the faithful. And I've kind of been kicking around this question within my head. Well, how much are we bound to, for example, a bishop who says no, for another 6 months we're going to close down the churches and there won't be any sacraments dispensed at all. And I have this scenario kicking in my head, even though it's probably not the case. I mean, if you look at some of the news services, you can kind of already start to see that people are realizing that it's probably safe to start opening up slowly and still continue doing it cautiously. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of where the conversation started. It's like how much obedience would we have to have in the future? And this is just a scenario. Obviously, it's not exactly where we are right now. There's a lot of variables too. For example, we are dispensed and we have a dispensation from the Archbishop. So we don't have an obligation on Sunday to go to Mass. And as far as getting confession, for example, we've just been instructed that we're able to do a perfect act of contrition, and that's good enough, right? So it's a little tricky to say, well, what do we do? Because at the same time, we've been given we've been given the tools in order to circumvent, the problem, essentially.
I think that something to think about, even just in the terminology, how we explain this, is we talk about dispensations from obligations.
Mm-hmm.
And why it's so unsatisfying is because for us, Mass isn't, and Catholicism isn't just an obligation. No. So when someone asks, why do you go to Mass? We don't go, oh, because we have to go on Sunday. I mean, that's true. We have an obligation to fulfill our commitment to the Lord, but we go because we want those graces. We want to grow closer to Christ. We want to grow closer to our Lord. Why do we go to confession? Oh, well, there's, you can get to the weeds of perfect contrition and imperfect contrition. I go to confession because I don't want to go to hell, or I go to confession because I love the Father. But the answer is that all these are labors of love. Mm-hmm. So imagine if you are trying to have a real loving relationship with the church and with Christ, and the typical methods and patterns that you have gone through to grow in that love and devotion are suddenly ripped away. Imagine this even in your own relationships. Imagine that if you and your wife, have a date every week, and that's a really important thing. You make sure that there's a rekindling of your love, and that now it's kind of gone. And as things and the reasons are becoming ever more unsatisfactory. So, we're not pessimists. This is not, again, a case like Imperial Rome. This is not a case like medieval Japan. This is not a case like current day China. But I wonder about these things, and it's an important thing because a lot of Catholics are suffering with this, and we have to be open and honest about it. And also, a big thing is that there are examples across the sphere, across our nation, of, I think, the best of both worlds, honestly. There are masses where everyone's inside their cars. It's like a drive-in theater, and the priest says his thing, and there might be drive-in communion. I know it's kind of a weird term. I don't ever intend to say it again. But, there's that. But it's all social distance, right? It's all respectable. But meanwhile, churches are closed, but they have no opportunity, in California at least, to open with proper social distancing, which we already actually see with our live stream. Thank God that we're allowed to bring back some of the choir and some more altar servers for St. Vitus. I mean, mm-hmm. I'm happy to helped in that. But meanwhile, I'm going to the supermarkets, and people are letting down their guard, and maybe rightly so, maybe wrongly so, I don't know. But it's like these precautions that were there a month ago, 2 weeks ago even, people are just going back to normal, because our natural state isn't to stay inside and be fearful. Just as Christ has to go out from the tomb, just as the apostles, more importantly, in this case, have to go out from the upper room, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're called to do. And as Catholics, we are instilled day by day with a devotion of going out and spreading the gospel, going out there just into the world, regardless of what the mortal consequences are. By mortal, I mean physical, not spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's an interesting question, because in the retrospect of this, when, you know, and by the way, there are some extremely good things into this I'll get. For instance, I don't know if you saw this today, Rudy, but the USCCB has decreed, and it's true, that the United States is going to be reconsecrated to the Virgin Mary on May 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that?
I did. Yeah. That's awesome.
So it's like, that's great. That's wonderful. And how sad is it, though, that we can't, in a way that tries to comply with the state, and that's going to be a whole topic, that we can't try to be there currently in our place, and how much it hurts, and how I don't blame, you know, there's a huge debate right now in first off in traditional Catholic Twitter, which is always a fun time. We didn't realize how much of a bloodbath it can be sometimes, but there's a huge question. Really, it'll boil down generally to what are the limits of those obediences, and what does it mean for the Catholic faithful to go out there and seek things even when there's a dispensation. And I tend to err on the side of caution more, because there's less stakes, if you will, ultimately, I think. But I can't blame, unless you're going to a sedevacantist, independent kind of chapel, I don't blame Catholics for really, trying to get back to normal, even if the state, and to an extent, even if some of our, but generally speaking, mostly just even if the state says no. There's a picture that's going around on Palm Sunday of, and it was posted on one of the meme pages that Rudy and I frequent on Facebook. So this is why it was big news. But there was a family that was gathered outside St. Vitus praying on the street. And the cops came by, and there were 3 cops, and they were like, listen, you're going to get cited unless you go away. And they weren't inside the church. They weren't trying to get inside the church. That's what they were doing. And I thought, I've not been one to just throw around the invocation of every amendment you can think of under the sun at any given time. But at what point does freedom get trumped by the public safety, right? And at what point does our obedience go, does obedience go as far as to really feel like there's a detriment to our souls? I don't have all the answers just yet, and I think that's what part of our conversation will be like. But these are the questions that everybody is thinking. And we as Catholics especially, we don't hide away from questions, even the really tough ones, but we go forward in them, just try to get some illumination and some sanity back into our lives.
Right. The thing that, one of the really good arguments against this that I heard in this conversation that I had was, well, look, we didn't merit these sacraments to begin with. And that's true. It's a good point. I think that's a really good point. But in the context of this situation, God designed, or deigned is actually the right word, deigned that these sacraments be the vehicles of grace, the primary vehicles of grace that we experience as human beings. And for us not to have access to them is a very grave thing. And so that question is bouncing around in my head as well. Look, we've been dispensed. We've had, everything that we need given to us at this moment. But it's strange when, for example, you go to a different archdiocese, like for example in San Diego, St. Anne's Parish, which is still open, and you can drive down there and go to confession. That's strange to me. There seems to be this disconnect between the bishops in the area, and to bring up a point that you brought up, is not the salvation of souls a primary and important thing? Is it just as important as keeping open a restaurant or a grocery store, if not more important than that? I think the answer is yes. It's so obvious, yes.
Yeah.
Now, maybe the state doesn't understand that because they're not Catholic, or maybe they are and they just have a deformed catechesis. But regardless of what the state thinks, the church is essential. It, in fact, is the most essential thing that we have.
Yeah.
And it's a little disheartening and almost aggravating when we see, maybe the laity or the clergy just kind of bow down to these really, mm, when they bow down to essentially without questioning what
Hmm.
this is.
I I am with our personal priests. I have so much admiration for what heroics they've done while choosing to err on the side of obedience. And I
Hmm.
don't want, first and foremost, I don't want to discredit them, and I don't want to say they're doing wrong, because I think they actually are doing the right thing.
Hmm.
One thing that really, really touched me is there were some churches just closed off right away. Ours didn't. And we already had a live stream set up, glory be to God, but perhaps crazier is confession. So, Mass was dispensed from all the faithful and stay home, and later it would drop off, of course. But for confession, our priest built a confessional outside, like just, not like built, like, but like, he moved the confessional outside, had everybody maintain 6 feet social distance, including from the priest to the confessional. And I was like, that's great. Like, here are the sacraments being dispersed, and it's in the confines that we're told are supposed to be helpful.
Hmm.
And then they stopped. And to your point, we have, the terms have been essential and non-essential. And of course, that's silly, because everybody who has a job to feed themselves and their family is essential. You know, everybody who is going to be suffering, it doesn't, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, like, yeah, when I'm suffering for these sorts of things, and I wanted to work and take that risk of my health, sure, in order to provide for me and my family, yeah, that's essential. But more important than our bodies is our souls. The
Hmm.
spiritual health of our person is more important. And it's difficult. I understand it's difficult. I happen to think that we're very fortunate, because everyone wants to. I know this urge too, right? Everybody wants to live in a diocese where where your bishop is an archfiend who is shutting down the Latin Mass, doing something evil, and you can just point to and go, aha, see this, they're just waiting for something like this. And unfortunately, we know that there are some out there whom that's not very surprising. We don't have that kind of case here, I don't think. Um, I don't I don't tend to, I don't think that Archbishop Gomez was rubbing his hands waiting to shut down
No, I
all
mean,
masses.
don't
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. I'm not
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, and
not
I know
saying
you
that
aren't either,
they're
and I
doing
want to make
that.
sure people understand that what we're describing more isn't an anger towards a particular person, but it is an honest frustration, and I think a lament, a genuine lament of our souls about this whole situation. And
Yeah.
it's okay to, and we have to understand also as Catholics that the history of Catholicism, the history of religion, is a history of lamentations. It's a book in the Bible for a reason. It's Job calling out, why has this happened to me, and why do I feel so powerless to all of this?
Yeah, granted, initially the projections for the damage that this pandemic was going to cause was really high, and I think that initially people were taking caution and erring on the side of caution because of the massive death toll that
Yeah.
that was predicted. But as time has gone on, this is the thing that bothers me a little bit. As time goes on, you realize that things are sort of easing up a little bit, and even that's not enough to kickstart safe procedures to bring back the mass, the sacraments, et cetera, et cetera. Not even creative ways to do it. So there aren't the things that we were talking about initially, like a drive-through mass or confession 6 feet apart and that sort of
Mhm.
thing. At least here in this archdiocese, like I said, in St. Anne's Parish, and it's an FSSP parish in San Diego. The church is still open. You can go in there and pray and receive the sacrament of reconciliation. So
Mhm.
um, I don't know. It's strange to me that it hasn't opened. And to be honest, we don't even have all the information just yet. It could be that in the next few days that the archbishop says, you know what, things are moving in a different way. but we're going to start opening up and doing our best to contain and keep everybody safe. But there's so many ways to make that happen.
Yeah.
Like people can donate supplies, people can wear a mask 6 feet apart, do everything that they can. Don't interact on on the premises. Just go for the sacraments. But
do you how do I word this? But do you think that because I feel this way as things go forward. I feel like we didn't fight. That's, I think, the most disappointing kind of. I mean, first off, by saying we didn't fight, that's not completely true. I have personal instances of priests and laity really doing all that they could to preserve this, and we are, I think, making the best of what we're trying to do. Right? There's so many people who are doing such heroic acts of the faith, but it's just weird that there wasn't it doesn't feel like there was just a slow roll off, and that there weren't holdouts or anything. It just feels like overnight everything just went blank. And that's one of the most frustrating aspects for me. It's that we hear about part of the reason why the church grew so rapidly in plague Rome is because the Christians were the only ones who stayed. That's what we were taught from as little children in catechism, that it was the love of the Christians to help other souls and nourish their own at the same time, and it's why there was a heroic kind of witness. And I feel like it's great that that there are businesses and there are a lot of workers, and I thank a lot of people who work at grocery stores or people who are doing a lot at Amazon right now, and plenty of other like CVS right down the road from me. I mean, these guys are really putting in the hours, and they stepped up to the plate, and that's awesome. And therefore, it feels all the more strange that as a church, we didn't fight to keep the sacraments in a way.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that looks like. I'm not saying that people should get hurt. I'm not saying that the church needs to be like always adversarial. And I'm not saying that the church can't work within the government prerogatives, but the answer is that we could. And I just don't feel like we did as much. And again, I don't want to be like all pessimistic down in the dumps about everything. There's a ton of good things. And I just want those good priests and those good faithful who have, really worked hard to keep that preservation. I want them exemplified more. I want them honored more, because I think that they're doing the real right kind of thing. And I know that that's a really big question for them. It's okay, well, can I do more? Or can I step up to the plate and do my part? Our priests are our fathers. And this is a perfect time where we see if our priests are really being fathers or not. And I'm very happy because we've been blessed with some who really have been.
Yeah.
And this also extends on to our bishops. Like, I think one thing is a question is, if this comes around again, will the churches close as they did? I think that generally just across the culture, people are going to be a lot more obstinate to close down like this ever again, especially because the numbers aren't there. If there were more, it's not to be macabre, but it's true. If this was a bigger crisis, and by that I mean if there was a higher body count, if there wasn't the speculation that a court of New York might be walking on antibodies right now, if we really saw just a complete bubonic plague, yeah, I think that's a proportionate cause for concern about this sort of thing. But I don't know if this was the right response, I think is what we're saying. And I think that it's hurt a lot of us as the faithful, and it's also
it's hurting the priests too.
And that's the thing. I don't want this to be all about us.
Yeah, they can't administer to their flock. They're doing the best that they can given the circumstances. Our priests at St. Vitus are providing the Mass continually for us and doing their absolute best given the circumstances. So
yeah. Our friend Anthony says, I know a priest that may be using this time off to learn the Latin Mass in Culver City.
Was that the Chad priest from Daily Mass?
The Chad. So there's a Novus Ordo priest. Anthony, maybe you could plug what parish that is, because I do want to go down and see him sometime. But there's this really, really Orthodox Novus Ordo priest in Culver City whose homilies are just like,
right on.
So, like, this guy is the coolest dude ever. I would pledge my sword to him in an instant. So that's great though. But that's another thing too. I hopefully, we talked about the positives of this quarantine to an extent, because people are spending more time with their families. I see couples and kids and families walking around, the streets are more empty. The airport here in Burbank is essentially 90% closed down. So it's kind of funny. Like, not listening to the sound of planes or the school across from me. So there's a lot of really nice things. St. Vitus again. So we have a small church, but our live stream gets 2,000 to 3,000 people. That's crazy because you can't fit them all. So I don't know who they all are. These are all really exciting things. And also, again, I do think part of it is, can you imagine the jubilee, the serious, radiant jubilee of when the masses open up again? I hope that we have a Eucharistic procession in Los Angeles. I mean, what a perfect, or a consecration procession of the Virgin Mary, just something. Our priests have talked about having a Eucharistic procession. I mean, imagine that first Family Sunday when we all come back. Even just thinking about it, like, I'm going to weep so openly at coming to Mass with my family and my friends again.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
I've never been so starved for Catholicism, even when I fell, and I have moments, right? I've had moments in my life where I'm like, this is so true and so deep to me. I remember sitting on a confirmation, right, where you read your letters from your sponsors and you're sitting there in the retreat center. I remember that's the first time that God really grabbed hold of me. And from there, there's just been moments like that. And I think that when we see the return of the King in that real way, that's going to make it so sweet. But that doesn't mean that this, our winter of discontent, didn't exist before.
Yeah. To be fair, this is now just the second month. It could be far worse. But it's going to be really awesome to talk about the happy things. I'm looking forward to the Mass and to seeing the priests and all of our friends and stuff, and having that normalcy back into our life. And to speak to your previous point, I want it to be where the next time something like this happens, that people will fight and refuse to get this taken away from us. Because, like I said, I can't speak with certainty that the reason why the churches are closed is because of a malignant reason. But to deny the faith is a very grave evil. Whether or not it's meant to be on purpose. Like, for example, I have an application up here from Pope Leo the 13th, right?
My boy.
And let's see, what document is this?
While you search, I just want to point out that Leo the 13th was the first pope to be recorded on film and the first pope to be audio recorded. So you can see him
quite
he
interesting.
Sits down and blesses the camera, and then he gives I think it's an Ave Maria.
It's like in 12 frames per second.
Yeah. It's like you're like, oh, this is before World War I.
Yeah. Well, this document is from Turnham, Elud, 1881. And he says it's openly repugnant to the natural or to the divine law. Let's see. Let me reread this. The only reason which men have for not obeying their rulers is when anything is demanded of them which is openly repugnant to the natural or divine law. For it is equally unlawful to command or to do anything in which the law of nature or the will of God is violated. So we have to ask ourselves, does God desire for us to be denied the sacraments, to shut down our churches, and to deny the faithful of the primary vehicles of grace that he's given us? He could certainly take it away, right? Yeah. He could certainly send a plague. Most people think this way. I happen to agree that this is a just punishment for years of just lukewarm and just uninterested Catholicism.
Yeah.
So it is possible that he could just take all of this stuff away as a punishment for us, temporal punishment, right? In the prayers of the coronavirus, of the traditional, what is it called? I think it's called it's the traditional pestilence prayer. And in this prayer, it talks about how, none of this ever ceases until God is satisfied with us returning to right order. But I don't know. I have a hard time thinking that, in the future, something similar happens, that God would be pleased for us to not have the sacraments. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I think what we have to remember is that a dispensation satisfies our obligations to God. But it doesn't mean that this is like the thing. It's not the thing that God intended, right?
Right.
So I'm reminded of what Christ says about divorce, right? It's like, well, can't like we divorce our wives? And Christ is essentially like, no.
It's like, well, I let you, but only because you guys had a really dummy thick skull.
Are you saying that's permissive will, Rudy? Or did God will the plurality of divorces, or did he permit divorces?
You're gonna have to submit a dubia. I may or may not answer it, though. Maybe I'll wait for you to die.
Okay, that's very important. We're so mean. One thing I think is true is this: there are certain circumstances where I think that obedience is not owed. Now, watch me when I say that, because I'm the kind of guy who wants to be very, very careful about this.
Yeah, absolutely. There always has to be distinctions.
Yeah, so I'll give an example, right? Yeah. There is an underground Catholic church in China right now.
Yep.
Who have pledged their obedience to Rome and to their bishops that are keeping the orthodoxy of the faith. You can't be a Catholic and a communist.
No.
I mean, obviously. So therefore, a Catholic does not owe obligation or obedience to the state of China, which by the virtue of its communism is atheistic. Mm-hmm. And by the virtue of its communism is nothing but antagonistic to actual Catholicism. Because if actual Catholicism was allowed to take root in China, that would lead to the changeover of the state. I won't say the toppling of the state, because we're not inherently we're not a violent people.
In fact, the government imposes its own version of Catholicism.
Yeah,
they appoint their own bishops.
Yeah, and that's why we've been so harsh about the Vatican deal with the Chinese government, because it's repugnant that the government of China, there is no ground for the government of China to be working with the Roman Church.
No.
It doesn't make any sense. And so that's one of the reasons. So that's an example where, as a Catholics in China, and our hearts go out to you guys, because that's a situation of having the Mass deprived and the sacraments deprived. Yeah, you owe an obligation to the tenets of the faith, and that's why sometimes that might mean you go against what is supposed to be your appointed proper bishop.
Yeah.
Right? I wouldn't say that this is quite that circumstance just yet, but I think it does reach a very interesting question. So we are owed nothing in our lives. We're not owed salvation, right? Part of what makes Christ's atonement so powerful is the fact that you can't merit yourself by your own bootstraps into heaven. It's the grace of God which does it. And before people are like, it's a little Protestant. Well, no, that's what faith and works working together is.
Yeah,
it's like
both.
The world. What makes Christ's crucifixion so powerful is that God looks down at the people who killed him because they didn't believe in him, or if they believed in him, they ran away, and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So that's a sort of strain that we have to look at things. So we're not owed anything, but by the virtue of our baptism, St. Paul says that we die with Christ, we are born, we are baptized into his life, we're baptized into his resurrection. And what's cool about that is that means that as a Catholic, there are obligations in the new covenant that you have between you and God. And these obligations nurture us, sanctify us. And that is the Eucharist, that is the Mass, that is the sacraments, that's sacramentals, that's living our lives with charity and prudence and abstinence and modesty, and for it to kind of go away so fast, of course it's going to get a lot of people trying to make sense of everything again. And because, again, we have so many examples in this, even just right now, by diocese, San Diego is only 2 hours away. So it's hard because you're like, okay, well, I have a dispensation from confession. I do believe in perfect contrition because that's what the church teaches. Mm-hmm. It's true.
Yep.
But again, these aren't supposed to be the normal means of grace, right? And so for someone like me, especially, like I can't wait to go to confession proper. It's not enough just to do when I say it's not enough to do perfect contrition, I don't mean by God's end. In my human understanding of things, I need the actual physical obligation of penance. And I don't want it to be a choose your own adventure, Jordan, on what you think is best for your sins. The priest serves a vital purpose. The church serves a vital purpose. And because of these sorts of things, I, I might have to do it. you know, I might make that 2 hour drive and do that. And just to be inside a church and meditate again or anything. And it's not because I want to stick it to my archbishop. It's not because I want to stick it to my priest. Most assuredly not.
No.
But this is a crazy time, and if there's a method that we can do to get to do the sacraments and to also make sure that we're not doing this because of disobedience, that's one thing. Real quick, I just wanted to point out that again, we haven't touched on it, and we'll probably have to touch on it in a later episode, because we do have a lot of people who ask us of our opinion of the Society of Pius X. Rudy and I are in a group thread. We go back and forth all the time. Both of us have evolved a lot on the society. Rudy has evolved more than me, I think, in some cases. But generally speaking, one thing that I think about is there's an obedience that's owed, of course. But we have to look at the reasoning of that obedience as well, because as Catholics, we're not called to be just like blind followers for the human element of the church, I should say. For God, it's like you don't argue with God. Of course you don't. And this is what I want to say about the society real quick. Again, it is the whole debate on the society, its canonical standing. One day we might talk about it, but honestly, that's not the purpose here. As right now, as a Catholic in good standing with Rome, you can attend a society mass, receive the sacraments. You can attend confession with a society priest, and it's valid. You can get married by a society priest, and that's a sacramental, valid marriage. You can give money to the society churches. I mean, these aren't just like fringe concepts. This is all in the books in Rome right now. And so, I'd just like to say that here's a perfect example of maybe understanding, like, take those sorts of allowances, and you don't, and all these things can be done. Like, you can attend a Society of Pius X mass, but you have to do it for the right reasons internally. So if you attend a Society of Pius X mass because you're really just doing a stepping stone to the Society of Pius V, you're really ascetic in conscience, or you want to just stick it to the Pope, or you want to stick it to the fraternity, you want to stick it to everything, those are not the right reasons.
Yeah,
and
you have to have
a right at heart for these kind of things.
Exactly. You have to have a properly discerned intention.
Yeah. If you
yeah.
are going because you desire the Latin Mass, you desire the sacraments, or there's no sacraments about for you to get, these are valid reasons to attend and to do so in good conscience and good standing. That God's not going to mark you against it. That's what the current modus proprio on the books are. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think this is a time where we kind of look at that and we go, okay, look, if Jordan Pacheco drives from the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, which by the virtue of my location means that my allegiance, so to speak, is to my bishop, which is Archbishop Gomez. If I drive down to San Diego, which is in a different diocese, to get confession, am I doing this because I am being disobedient to my bishop? Or it's like, well, no, it's not because I'm sticking it to Archbishop Gomez. It's because, and I'm not doing something outside of the church in order to think that this is the better way of my soul. I'm not doing anything Protestant. But because we have the means for the sacrament and it exists someplace else, and we as Catholics are obligated in our new covenant to first off really try to work in the tenets of obedience, but also to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And there is a bit of wiggle room here. Just like we know that some people go to confession at different times than other people. Yeah, sometimes if you're like, look, this is an emergency. Like, I don't like I understand what the bishop's reasoning is to an extent. On why churches should be shut down and everything, but like if there's an opportunity where I can take it and it's sacramentally valid and it's good to the eyes of God, because I'm just trying to be a good Catholic, doing what best I can, I'd say at this point there is nothing wrong with taking those sorts of options.
No, you can't fault that. Sometimes people talk about, regarding obedience, they talk about we have to have our allegiance to our leaders, and that's true, because our church is a monarchy, divinely instituted by God, and it's top down. It's not it's not the other way around. So
Yeah.
I can't proclaim a certain thing one day, an opinion, and say that this is 100% the magisterium of the church and that I'm going to follow my own way or anything. But there are recorded instances in history where there have been choices that have been made that weren't the right choice. I mean, historically, the biggest one that comes to mind is Paul rebuking Peter. Um,
Yeah.
so that's a great example of, look, our Holy Father, he's our Holy Father. He's got my allegiance. He's the Vicar of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether or not he decides to keep the title or do whatever he does. My allegiance is to him, unless there is something that he's doing that is gravely contrary to the magisterium of the church, the traditions of the church with a big T, um, that we've had for almost 2,000 years.
Yeah.
So we are called to obey. We definitely are. And right now we're in a situation where they're hairy. They're not exactly at the point of our scenario that we brought up initially, but they definitely have the potential to be there in the future. I think, call me a conspiracy theorist or whatever, but I think that certain things. I'm not saying that this isn't a real virus or a pandemic or whatever, but I do think that people never waste an opportunity to test things out.
Yeah.
And I don't have the same trust that I have for our civil government that I would for my pastor or certain bishops or whatever. you know I don't think that they're not using this opportunity to quash your freedom. I mean, you're looking at it all over the place, all over the state, the country. I mean,
Isn't it funny? So I think it's true. It's like never let a crisis go to waste. And I think what we're seeing is an emergence of,
exactly.
this is an age-old debate. So it's of course going to sound like a very American kind of debate, but it's so much deeper, obviously, because it touches on our Catholicism.
Right.
There's always a debate going on of freedoms and securities. And as you and I, we both know that there are certain circumstances, of course. I usually talk about it with existential crises like war. I think at the beginning of this whole woo-flu thing, it felt like an existential crisis. No one knew what was going on, what the death count's going to be. And so I was willing to give an experiment until we figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who want to, for the sake of public safety, it's always public, for the sake of your safety, because they know better, are going to quash your liberties. And here's the thing, the big question right now, and this is being challenged at in states right now, in a lot of states. Look what's going on in Michigan or Ohio, for heaven's sake. It's like we have an expressed right to public assembly.
Mm-hmm.
We have that. And this is what a right means, in case people need to be reminded, that the government shall make no infringement upon insert X amount of right, because it is not the government's position to do so. Now, we have made natural successions, right? So we think, okay, look, if there are bombs outside and it's war and World War III or something, yeah, it probably means we do believe in wartime powers and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, when we look at what this crisis has done and how it's gone about, the question has to be, did we sacrifice our liberties? Did we sacrifice our obligations even too early, too easily, and all for naught? And I think at this point, a lot of people are really beginning to say, yeah, I think this is overblown. And look how easy it was to get the mass shut down, essentially. The fact, again, I will never forget this picture in this story. The fact that a family outside of a church praying is a citation. Well, it's an existential crisis. No, it's not. The fact that it's a citation, the fact that it's an offense punishable by law or a sort of law, whether local or state or federal, is a problem. I don't like that world shaping up, and I don't believe that people who do that have. I know that they say, I know there are some, look, there's always going to be good people on both sides of things. But I think that in terms of the long-term effect, I don't think that's a good trade-off.
No.
I don't think that it's okay. And I really want to encourage our leaders in the church especially to hopefully have that holy fire of God in them whenever a crisis like this comes up. And I'm laity, and you're a lady who is listening. So look, we have an empowerment given to us by God to raise, support holy priests and bishops and each other. But ultimately, all the great decisions of the church aren't laity inspired.
No.
We're not a democracy, we're a monarchy. And when we say that we owe obedience to a man, it's not so much the man as it is the office. Yeah. So it's like I'm obedient not because I think that, you know, this man is like my hero necessarily all the time, but because I respect the office. I respect the office of my priest. I respect that he is my spiritual father in all things completely. I trust him more than I trust my secular temporal rulers on my actual well-being, because he is concerned about a plane that they don't even envision.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, you talked about this a little bit ago, Rudy, but it's like there have been a rise in, you know, it's like, again, man is not meant to stay like this. Look at the rise in domestic disputes, divorce, mental health, suicide, unfortunately. I mean, things that deal a lot of times with just more than just the physical and the financial, right? Because they all are related. And, you know, I'm feeling that. And, you know, I want to make sure that our leaders know how much I love them and care for them and pray for them and want myself to respect them. But yeah, I think that now is a time where we as Catholics start saying, okay, I'm willing to stand by my priest if he wants to do something like if he wants to do something. I'm willing to stand by my bishop if he's like, okay, look, we're going to open up the diocese.
Yeah.
You know, we have to understand like what our limits of our faith are. If your priest was like, okay, there are priests in Italy, I talked about a little bit. They're doing the Eucharistic processions, keeping social distancing, and they're getting cited for it. As laity, that's the most admirable thing.
Yeah, just recently too, there was a priest who was celebrating the Mass, and a police officer comes in, interrupts him in the middle of the Mass.
Yeah.
That could be our future. That's in Italy. You know, it's a little different here, but, you know, it's certainly possible. It could happen here.
But, you know, once upon a time, it wasn't. Because once upon a time, and generally speaking, here's the thing. In this country, we talk about separation of church and state a lot. I think there's one aspect of it that I don't think is talked about, and that is that the state doesn't have a right to infringe on the matters of the church. This is why something like gay marriage in 2012 was a really, really big deal for the religious world, because marriage it's first off, of course, it comes from the natural law. Rudy was talking about that a little earlier in the day, but then second of all, it's elevated because of the sacramentality of it. So the state doesn't have a claim over marriage, because if the state ceases to exist, marriage still exists. It has a right to recognize it.
Yeah.
This is exactly what the Mass is. I don't go to Mass because I live in a country which allows me to go to the Mass. A lot of our ancestors lived in situations where the Mass wasn't legal or permitted or advisable, or you weren't a good patriot or a citizen for doing it. Even Catholics in this country, you know, America has a really tepid history with Catholicism. It's by its basis a more of a Calvinistic kind of nation. And so we know that even though we haven't had the bloodbaths religiously as other countries have, we know that that's a huge factor, that it is about the faith. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to have people who have no desire to understand the depths of what the Mass means to you dictating when you can or can't go to the Mass unless they have a stake in the game, which is why I will, if Newsom said churches are closed and Gomez said no, who would you go with?
Go with the bishop, man.
Go with the bishop
every time.
The only reason we're having this talk is because we want to be obedient to our bishop, because it's not an easy thing to go, I wouldn't be like, oh no, I'm sorry. Now forget you, Gomez. It's like, no. You owe your bishop that kind of honor and respect. Instead,
why is that? The reason why we're saying this is because the bishop represents, in a certain sense, the shepherd. He is a shepherd of Christ.
Yeah.
And this speaks to really the theme of this whole thing, which is the social kingship of Christ. Who do we serve?
Yeah.
We always serve God. That is our end. Our whole goal is to do that. So if that was imposed on us, absolutely, the right thing to do would be to follow the bishop and to support the bishop.
Yeah. That's a really, I didn't even think about that. How crazy it's been. We've been in this whole quarantine. We haven't even talked about the social kingship of Christ. What a perfect example of our lives to really show that. This is a perfect example of the limits of temporal authority. We know that all authority on earth comes from heaven,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I think about, of course we know, give to Caesar, God to God. As Christians, we're called to obey our rulers so long as they're not infringing on our spiritual matters, right?
Yeah.
And we also know that Christ looked at Pilate right in the eye and said that all power you have is given from above.
Yeah.
Like, and so this is an example. This is an example of look, I believe in social distancing at the moment. Okay, I believe in flattening the curve.
Mhm.
Now, apparently, the goalposts have shifted to make sure that there's no case ever, because a lot of this is politics, and it's very silly to pretend it's not. We're not united on this at all as a people.
Well, we're pretending like we're not going to have this for the rest of our life now.
Yeah, and
like it's a one-time thing.
But also, it's like it's making a conscious decision. I don't know about you, but I choose not to be ruled by fear.
Yeah. No.
I don't want to be. God goes into our. In fact, not what was it? Was it last week? Yeah, it's last week's, right? Last week's gospel, where Jesus appears in their midst, and you have doubting Thomas, and it's touch my side and everything.
Yep.
Like, and what does he say? He comes to them. What does he say? He says, "Do not be afraid." Multiple times.
I mean, and it's like one of the most common phrases that you'll ever see is "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid." That's like angels say it. Christ said it.
Yeah, that's and it's funny because I think this is a perfect example where we see physically what that really means. There are people who want to tell you that you're going to catch Wu flu and die tomorrow. And look, I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm not a denier. And that's exactly it. It's like the answer is maybe. Maybe. So many people die in car accidents.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say maybe I'll get in the car tomorrow and go to the supermarket, and somebody's going to be on their phone. Or because they haven't been driving around, in traffic, they forgot how to drive. Which that's happening.
That's actually true.
It's true. It's happening now.
People are getting worse now that there's more room.
So people forget, and then it could be that I don't die from the virus, and I get plowed by a 60-mile-per-hour missile, and it's like, okay, well, one day we're gonna die.
Yeah.
One day.
Yeah, memento mori.
I don't know when it's gonna be. And I'm not gonna wake up tomorrow and think, oh, should I get out of bed? I don't know.
We know not the hour or the day, only the Father in heaven.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect example. This is why, people. I have a friend who got, he posted a social media post, and he was like, people are losing their jobs, their livelihoods, and their family life, and we need to get back to work, and it's silly, more or less, right? Not that cavalier in the comment, but a sentiment that's very common now is that, look, I need to work. I will take the risk. I want to do this. And he was lambasted as somebody who wants people to die.
Yeah.
That's not true at all. But what we see people, I think honestly, it is the product of a society that is largely godless.
Mm-hmm.
If this is all that you have, if all you have is your health, and now even that's in jeopardy, and all you have is science, right? And then the science says, yeah, there's not a cure for this one or whatever. It makes a lot of sense why people would freak out. Never mind the political points or maybe just people's dispositions. But I think that if you really are living a Christian life, I've been saying this a lot lately, and that's that. Listen, we get right with God, get right with our families, and then we do what we have to do. And I'm not saying again that means that I'm going to just not wear a mask in the supermarket, because I understand that there is precaution towards your fellow man that you owe your fellow man as a neighbor, and you love your neighbor.
Charity.
Yeah, it's charity. And, it's like, are masks effective? Are they not effective? Well, it looks like we're going to have to figure that one out again. But listen, until someone tells me otherwise, that's a precaution I'm willing to take because I want to be charitable to my neighbor.
Yeah.
But guess what? That doesn't mean that I don't suddenly lose this desire or not the right, of course, but the necessity for our souls to go to Mass. I don't want to live my life on a dispensation. I want to live my life in the fullness of the resurrected Lord. I don't want to live my life spiritual communion every Sunday. I want to go to confession, and I want to take in our Lord as I've done for the entirety of my life.
This is the scene in the movie, where the couple's like, I don't know, it's like 5 years in, the love is dried up, and the wife is like, I want to live. I want to go out again. I want to
go dancing.
We never even dance anymore.
Oh, that's right. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I want to go to Mass, man. I want to go to Mass.
Mm-hmm.
I want to kneel there in front of our blessed Lord. That's what I want the most.
That's all I want. It is so. That's why at the start I said this was a lament, because look, it's really, again, you can tell, but it's easy. The easy way out is to just get angry and do something stupid. Well, if if my priest won't do this, then I'll go find like in this case like an independent chapel that will. Don't do that.
And
Don't be a set of a contest.
here's what I suggest is that if this continues to get extended, the goalpost keeps getting moved. We don't have much power as laity to say no. I'm just I'm gonna do my own thing. But we do have the capability to write our archbishop, or our regional bishop actually is the proper thing to do. So for us in the San Fernando Valley, we have Bishop Ackland, and he can be in contact with the archbishop and really intercede for us so that we can hopefully, I don't know much about Bishop Ackland, but if a father, I mean, this is again like if your child asks for food and you give him a snake, that's not how it works, right? I don't think that asking the bishop is futile. Like I don't think they're just going to say, whatever, yourself,
Yeah. Well, not ours at least, not ours here.
Maybe not here. Probably not. Somewhere else, maybe. You never know.
Unfortunately, I was going to say
in
Germany,
are bad shepherds.
Yes, there are. I'd like to remind everybody, by the way, that we are on a road to 100. That means that if we get 100 subscribers, we can start putting up community posts here on YouTube, which is going to hopefully help us grow even more. It's going to allow us to notify all the better when we have an episode out. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Oh, I want to draw your attention to the very beautiful titling that Rudy did. That was all his handiwork. I want you to take special attention to the Roman U's, which are V's, which I think is so awesome. But man, dude, what a clean looking setup. Thank you all, everyone in chat. If you guys have any questions or comments as we kind of wrap down here, please go ahead and fill them. I want to give a shout out to my very good buddy, Jared Wendler. Thanks for tuning in. He asked us real quick, Rudy, when can we lead a crusade to take back the Holy Land? Deus Volt, let me know and keep up the good work. Thanks.
I don't know. How's tomorrow sound for you?
Oh,
man. Check your schedule.
Dude, I don't know if you start doing this, but I've started calling Istanbul Constantinople again.
Tickets are really cheap right now. We could fly over there.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine? We can wear the helmets and everything.
Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, I suppose when everyone kind of laughs and scoffs, of course, when Christ comes back is when the Holy Land will be properly reclaimed. But, the world we've entered the post-war order. Who knows what the world will look like, right?
You never know. You get a taste of it every day. Yeah. You get a taste of it when a virus comes around.
Oh my. Speaking of viruses out of that part of the world, Chris Marino says, I don't expect that to last too much longer. He comes from our earlier comment talking about the interaction between
Chinese,
the church and Chinese government, because the CCP is really cracking down on Christianity now. That's true. And I think an unfortunate thing is it's only going to get worse because I think that the longer it goes on, generally speaking, across all of Chinese culture, I've noticed, I think about like the Umbrella Revolution, everything happens in Hong Kong and now inside the church. I think that people are having more, being more emboldened.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of factors again, this is a post-war order. Don't want to get into whole sticks of it. But yeah, I think that things have a tendency to get worse before they get better. But the answer also is that God's calling. And there's no authority I can think of, temporal authority on earth that has ever been able to withstand him.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to remind everybody that there was a Roman emperor who thought himself a deity, where the heirs of St. Peter currently are. So that's very, very important.
That's our church. We conquer. We hang on, sometimes by a thread.
We're hanging on.
So that's where we are right now today.
Please, please, please continue to pray for your priests and your bishops and each other, of course, but as this whole climate of crisis hopefully starts winding down and not ramping up, really just the heroic virtues of the faith, let's pray for all of us to have. And if you have a resource that I think people would really help benefit from, if you know of, again, like San Diego's far, but if you know a church, there we go, livemass.net is, as Rudy points out. Look, we're live streaming the Mass every single day. And it's Latin Mass here at St. Vitus, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. After the stream, it's we're not obligated to attend Mass during the week, and right now we're dispensed from Mass, but you can still unite yourself to that sacrifice that is taking place.
Yeah,
the one sacrifice of Christ. So why not, after this stream is over, just pop on to live mass, click on the live button, and tune into the mass taking place at St. Vitus.
And it's way better to attune yourself to the mass technologically than it is to just despair from it altogether.
Yep.
Of course, it's not ideal. It's not the satisfying route to go. Believe me, I know. But, this is one of the cases where it's better than nothing. And there are a lot of priests and holy people and good people who love you and love God, who are doing the best they can in this difficult time. And they need to be supported. Despair is not the Catholic way.
Yeah.
Great. Well,
all right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, please go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe. Hitting the notification bell is huge for us because it lets you know when we have these live streams. These tend to be coming out weekly now. We'll see if that keeps up. And if you will want to, you can go follow us on Twitter at GladTrad Podcast. We'd love for you to stop by. You can also check out all of our podcasts, the ones that are live broadcasts, like these ones here on YouTube, as well as all of our older ones, our sit-down ones, at gladtradpodcast.buzzsprout.com, as well as literally everywhere podcasts are. Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts is really popular, iHeartRadio. And in fact, I was just Googling us today, Rudy, and we're on all these other podcasting sites that I can't even keep up with. So our feed's being grabbed all over, and just judging by our views, we also really appreciate you sharing this, especially maybe with a Catholic who is despairing a little bit or doesn't know where to go or what to do. We hope that this show finds some comfort, and we are praying for you, and please, please, please continue to pray for us.
Oh, I should say too, if you are planning on tuning in to the Mass that's taking place in 15 minutes at St. Vitus, you might not have a missal, so you can't follow along properly. So I wanted to say that you can actually type in 1962 Missal online, and it'll give you the readings of the day. So if you,
I would also like to
Google,
point out on that note that you can go to the Laudate app.
Yeah, and they're there too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You go there, you go to Daily Reading Saint of the Day. That's where it has Latin Mass. This is a free app, by the way.
Yep.
So you have no excuse not to have a missal anymore.
Yeah.
And so you go down there, you click Latin Mass, and that's updated to whatever the 62 Mass of the day is.
Yep.
So that's a powerful resource for you as well.
All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. We're praying for you. Please continue praying for us, and we'll catch you next week.
God bless you. May I keep you. Adios.
All right.